Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Dublin launch of the Patients Deserve Better campaign to highlight the critical shortage of neurology nurses throughout Ireland. And this campaign launched in October 2021, and already we've been around the country with the campaign. We've been Limerick, Cork, Waterford, Sligo, Galway, and today we're coming to highlight the shortage across the Dublin hospitals. Our campaign is supported by 15 national patient organisations that are members of the Neurological Alliance of Ireland and also supported by an education grant from Roche. I'm delighted to have speaking today the clinical lead for neurology, Professor Orla Hardiman, Martina, McKenna, clinical nurse specialist working at the front line in neurology services, and patient representatives Emer O'Sullivan and Veronica Byrne, who are going to talk about their personal experience of living with a neurological condition and the importance of nurse specialists in their care. I would encourage people to use the chat function, to our audience to use the chat function this morning if they have any questions or comments. I'm aware we have a number of our elected representatives this morning to hear the presentations. I issued them with a warm welcome, thank them in advance for their support. And just to say, I would encourage them to let us know that they're here and introduce themselves using the chat function. So again, if you have any comments, questions, use the chat function, and I will pick those up in the course of the morning. I'm just going to share a few brief slides in relation to the campaign before I pass on to Professor Hardiman. So just bear with me here. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So this is the Dublin launch, and as I say, we've been around the country with this campaign. Our launch today is to highlight the situation across the Dublin hospitals. And just to draw your attention to the flyer on the right, you see the critical shortages across all of the Dublin hospitals in terms of neurology nurse specialists. Briefly, the organisation supporting the campaign, 15 national patient organisations supporting this campaign, highlighting the importance of neurology nurses to the management of conditions from multiple sclerosis to migraine to epilepsy to Parkinson's and some of the rarer conditions as well, as we highlighted yesterday on Rare Disease Day. I suppose just to highlight one of the stark waiting lists in neurology at the moment, there are over 23,000 people waiting on a neurology appointment in January 2022. I suppose what's of a lot of concern to groups in the Neurological Alliance of Ireland is the number of people that are waiting more than 18 months, which has jumped from around 300 in August 2015 to over 7,000 in January 2022. And one of the points we'll be making this morning, Professor Hardiman will be making this point, and also Martina, a nurse working at the front line, is that nurses are critically important in tackling these waiting lists. I would encourage people to visit our website, www.patientsdeservebetter.ie, where they can find a range of information about the evidence base for this campaign on the importance of neurology nurses. And you can see in that graphic that they have a number of roles of frontline patient care, but also generally improving the efficacy and efficiency of neurology services, reducing the burden on consultant neurologists, making the service work more effectively, and critically in the administration and the monitoring of the new treatments that are coming on board for many of the neurological conditions. And Professor Hardiman and Martina will speak to that this morning. There is, as we highlight in our campaign, patientsdeservebetter.ie, there's a critical shortage of neurology nurses across every neurology centre nationwide. And just a stark finding for a recent mapping exercise, national mapping exercise has been carried out on people living with Parkinson's disease, that only 21% of them, only 1/5 of people with Parkinson's disease, which is a relatively common neurological condition, have access to a specialist nurse. And there is no specialist nurse for the majority of rare neurological diseases. There are exceptions. So Professor Hardiman will talk about motor neuron disease, which is working exceptionally well with the nurse specialists that have in place. But for conditions such as Huntington's disease, muscular dystrophy that Emer is going to talk about, there are no specialist nurses in place. Today, we're here to talk about the shortage of nurses across Dublin hospitals. And there might be a perception that this problem is outside of Dublin. It most certainly isn't. There is a critical shortage of neurology nurses across all the Dublin hospitals, many of which are centres of expertise for certain neurological conditions. And they critically need the nursing staff to provide those national centres of expertise. What you see, and Martina will talk about, is excessive caseloads for existing nursing staff. So they're not getting to all the patients that they need to get to, or providing the service that they need to, the one-to-one service that they need to provide. And also that new and emerging treatments, which is good news for people with neurological conditions, but this will also create more demand for nurse specialists to monitor and administer those treatments. As I say, while this is good news, it is creating an extra demand and an extra burden on those nurses that are in place. I'd encourage people to visit our website, patientsdeservebetter.ie, and to join the conversation at Patients Deserve Better. And just to say that, just to welcome, as I say, our speakers this morning that I'm going to pass on to now, but just to say that there is a function on patientsdeservebetter.ie to pick your Dublin hospital and to contact your local TDs to highlight the situation in the Dublin hospital, in hospitals in their constituency. So I'm going to ask Professor Hardiman to speak at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Mags. And I speak in my capacity as the clinical lead for neurology. And I think I speak on behalf of all my colleagues who are consultant neurologists around the country as well, and who are committed to the development of neurological services in the country. It's a great privilege actually to participate in this webinar with the Neurological Alliance, representing the people that we serve, who are people who happen to have neurological conditions. And our objective is to maximize the level of care that we can provide, but also to align closely with the objectives and aspirations of Sláintecare. So within the clinical lead program, we recognize that there's a requirement to provide the best type of care for people with neurological conditions in multidisciplinary service and multidisciplinary clinics. And our plan in this regard is to recognize 10 hubs of neurological services or neurological care around the country, each of which would link out then into the geographic regions that they would serve. And each of these hubs would have a full multidisciplinary team, which includes the appropriate deployment of specialist nurses. Specialist nurses are really important. The specialist nurse has a complementary skill set to the neurologist. When I was training first, one of the phrases that was used for neurology was diagnose adios. So we were very good at making diagnoses, but we weren't very good at the ongoing treatment and management. Now, thankfully, that has changed, but much of the change has happened in our recognition of our role, the role that we play as members of the multidisciplinary team. And the development of the nursing career structure has really enhanced that. And I think that now, given the aspirations and the plans, both for the regionalisation of the health system and also the aspirations aligned with that with Sláintecare, this is a perfect time for us to really describe in detail the added value that the specialist nurse can provide, both for general neurology in the centres where maybe there aren't enough neurologists yet. And we have some neurology centres where there may be only 2 neurologists serving very large populations. And in those situations, there are roles for nurses who have expertise across the range of neurological illnesses. But in the centres that are somewhat more developed, where we have the luxury of having a larger number of neurologists and where we're developing tertiary and quaternary services, there's a strong case to be made to have an appropriate number of specialist nurses and with specialty interests such as Martina, specialty training in particular diseases. And if we look at the common neurological diseases such as migraine starting out, which is common 18% of the country, suffers from migraine type headaches, through to the rare diseases, there's scope for a very extensive development of the services in the region of up to 100 nurses. We've put in this year for 16 specialist nurses, and the most likely deployment of these will be within the schema of the service development program that we've put in place for neurological care. And that is working in alignment with the scheduled care programs and the aspirations and desires of Neurological Alliance and my own colleagues, to divide neurologists goes into the types of needs that we have. So we have already established a program for headache and migraine, which for which we've submitted to estimates and also had funding to the Sláinte Care pilot implementation program, which is now being mainstreamed as well. That program is heavily concentrated not on the additional deployment of neurologists, but on expanding and enhancing the multidisciplinary team led out by specialist nurses. So our objective there will be to have a specialist migraine nurse in every centre in the country. If we look at migraine, for example, and we look at the waiting list, 20% of neurological waiting lists are due to headache or migraine. So if we can really deploy these specialist nurses and train them adequately and build out the service, we will significantly improve the that really terrible waiting list that we're seeing. So that's a really it's a very tangible and achievable objective. We already have data showing from 3 centres around Dublin and Galway that the appointment of specialty nurses along with other support staff including psychology can make a very significant difference both in the waiting list and also in the patient journey, which is really important. It's also important for the rare diseases, and in the estimates that we put in this year, we also recognise that there are conditions where really there is a shameful shortfall in the type of service that we can provide. And one example of that would be Huntington's disease, and there is a programme running at the moment to really highlight the plight of those with Huntington's disease. There was a piece in the Irish Independent yesterday about this. And putting in specialty nurses is the beginning of that very large iceberg that we need to deal with in terms of the delivery of care for people with Huntington's disease. But it's also true for all of the other conditions that are represented on this call today. Another point that I'd like to make is the importance of linking the clinical care programs that we have that are funded directly by the Exchequer, by the HSE, with the enormous level of expertise and commitment that we see within the voluntary sector. We're unusual in Ireland in that we have a very strong and vibrant voluntary sector that really fills in many of the gaps within the delivery of care for people with health problems in Ireland. And if we look at the representatives on the call here today, I can call out every single one of them and describe the superb level of care and investment that they put into the support of people that represent their constituents. To give you one example of my own experience with the Motor Neurone Disease Association, as Mags mentioned, we have probably a fairly good standard of care, a model of care for the delivery of people of service for people with motor neurone disease. There are 4 Exchequer funded nurses that work at the specialty centre in Beaumont, but the other 4 nurses are funded from voluntary sector to the Irish Motor Neurone Disease Association. One of the things for which we should be advocating is to provide service level agreements with these organisations so that the Exchequer continues to fund that service, but that service is ring fenced and that those nurses are not dependent on churchgate collections and lottery funding. So one of the things that we should do in our design of the service development and in the integration of the knowledge that the representatives on this call have is to ensure that is harnessed and supported and protected in the future. And that would be by ensuring that some of the specialty nurses that are already in post or that are in development that are funded by the voluntary sector should be funded by the Exchequer. So there are many pieces of evidence to demonstrate how beneficial this might be. I'll finish by saying that despite the difficulties that we have within the sector, and despite the limitations in the delivery care that we have, there are wins, there are successes that we can point to. the migraine program is a success, and we are at first, I suppose, in the world of headache, to really have demonstrated a beneficial link in terms of the provision of nursing care aligned with the Migraine Association of Ireland. We also have recently been recognised to the European Rare Disease Network, the EON, European Reference Network, for the excellence that we provide for neuromuscular disease in Ireland. And that's a linkage between Children's Hospital Ireland, the College of Surgeons hospitals, and Cork University hospitals in the South-Southwest. So we are already recognised for the type of care that we provide. We need to really consolidate that. And one of the mechanisms, vehicles by which this needs to be done is by the support and development of the role of the clinical nurse specialist as the integrator of multidisciplinary care across the community. So I really hope that the message that we transmit today is that this is an emergency. This is something we need to do. This is cheap because the provision and deployment of nurses is enormously good value for money, and it significantly enhances the level of care, and it allows us to help to integrate the hospital-based service with the community-based service, and both services with the voluntary sector. Thank you very much.
Professor Hardiman, thank you so much for that. And a strong message on the value of neurology nursing coming from the clinical lead. Just to say that I suppose flagging to the elected representatives that we have today, that today we're focusing on the Dublin hospitals, but we will be back with a national culmination event for this campaign in May, along with Professor Hardiman, in advance of this year's estimates process, to send a strong message, including from the neurology clinical program that we're working with on this, together with our colleagues in specialist nursing, to give a strong message in the forthcoming estimates process of the need to invest in neurology nurses going forward. Professor Hardiman, I know you have another appointment this morning, so I'll let you go to that, but thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think this is a really important initiative, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak on behalf of my colleagues.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Martina McKenna, who, as I say, is a clinical nurse specialist working at the front line in neurology services. Martina, we heard from the clinical lead for neurology, Professor Hardiman, singing the praises of neurology nurses and highlighting their critical importance for the service. But I think this morning you're really going to talk about the gap between that praise and what's actually available in terms of resources to yourself and your colleagues working at the front line.
Thanks very much. So I suppose first I want to thank Professor Hardiman. I had the privilege of working with her about 13 years ago when I worked in Beaumont Hospital, and she has always been very supportive of nursing. And I suppose I'm delighted to hear, you know, in terms of the neurology program and other initiatives, you know, looking at nursing, and I suppose looking at the importance of nursing, and working together to, I suppose, make things even better, you know. So I suppose to start, I work at a neurology service as a neurology nurse. And what does that mean? So technically that means that any neurological condition that someone is diagnosed with, the neurology team can refer that patient to me. So of course that's not feasible because there are something like 800,000 people with a neurological condition in Ireland. So if you work out the maths of the number of nurses and the number of people who would need access to a nurse, the maths just doesn't work out. In reality, what I do is I focus on multiple sclerosis patients. So when a person is diagnosed in a clinic, I will be introduced to them. I will, I suppose, talk through to them about the diagnosis and how it's going to be managed. There's lots of, I suppose, pre-checks to be done before treatment. The first thing actually I do is ensure that the person is filled in the application form for a long-term illness card. And so that will allow them get their medication. Someone who's diagnosed with any neurological condition, it's devastating news. Many of them will have been living their life, they're young, they're working, they're planning a family. And then suddenly they get this news. They may have realized there was something wrong. Some of them it'll come completely out of the blue. And having someone to support them through that journey, I suppose it just eases the burden somewhat. A person diagnosed with a neurological condition, it's for life. So we don't discharge patients from our service. So year on year, we're adding people to our service. And it is a privilege to meet those people and try and I suppose, lessen the impact of the condition. And I suppose help them to manage, because we're dealing with lots of very, I suppose, toxic treatments to their body, and how that's managed, and how, you know, what they need to do in terms of getting bloods done, all that kind of thing. And to do that on their own, which I know there are people out there with different conditions who do not have a nurse, and they're having to try and navigate the health service, figure out how to get their entitlements, even to, I suppose, to know what to do when they are diagnosed. It's not possible, I suppose, to sort everything out in one go. And we're not here to ask for that. I suppose what we're trying to do is improve things somewhat. When the challenges, I suppose, to what I do, or what someone like me will do, I know we're focused on Dublin hospitals, but just to highlight, I have patients who come to me who are from Donegal, they're from Cork, they're from Waterford, and they're from Sligo. That's not to say that there aren't some areas where there are services. It's just the sheer volume, and it's not possible maybe for them to link into their closest service. They may have lived or worked in Dublin at some point, and now they've moved back home, but to get access to the service down there might take a couple of years. Space is a huge problem. So for instance, I went to clinic yesterday, but there's no room for me to see a patient in the clinic. So what I do to organize and see a patient is I will arrange a time to maybe phone them or do a video call or bring them in another day. Some of the nurses around the country don't have an office space. They don't have access to a computer, and a phone, you know, can be hit and miss. Now that's unbelievable. You know, like if you were telling somebody that, I think they think you were making it up. But that is the truth. I am very lucky where I work. We have good access to IT. I actually have a computer that has a camera, so you know you can see me here today. But that's not the case for everyone. One of the biggest challenges, I suppose, at the moment is time. I have less time now than I had when I started 13 years ago to spend with a person and go through the diagnosis and go through the management and the treatment, because the volume of people that are coming to our service, my workload is increased fourfold. It's just the number of people diagnosed in January or February this year compared to a few years ago is just, you just can't compare. So it's quite frustrating really to think, you know, you're trying to do the best and you just feel all the time that what you're doing is less than what you would like to do. I'm in a service, so looking after people with MS, and there is no other MS nurse with me. So if I'm not here, there is no MS nurse service. And I suppose that really came to light last year when I had to take some time out and there was no service. And when you come back to a service that hasn't had a nurse for a number of months, it's quite a job of work to try and get it back up and running. It's also very stressful because there's always somebody that you need to contact, and you know, you go home at the end of the day and you go, oh God, I didn't ring that person back. And you're kind of, oh, I hope they're all right. So there's a constant stress and worry that, you know, are you doing enough? Now we are doing what we can within, I suppose, the constraints of what we have. And it's not all bad. So I don't want to come across that everything is doom and gloom, because there's some, you know, there is great things happening. But I think we can do better. And I think patients deserve better. They deserve to have a nurse who can, I suppose, hold their hand through this. This is a condition for life. For some people, that could be a 30 or 40 year journey. For other people, unfortunately, it may be much less. I suppose for a clinical nurse specialist, we have, I suppose, there's a list of things that the nurse you're supposed to do. And unfortunately, I don't get to do a lot of those things because of the sheer volume of work. I really, I suppose, want to get across today that if there was more nurses, I think it would be a much better journey for the patients. More nurses could mean that we could have a caseload of patients, and that would reduce the number of follow-up appointments that a person might need to go to a neurologist. So you have more slots for new patients. Because as we know, there's something like 24,000 people waiting to be seen. And it's not even, you know, I know that you know, people might say, oh, well, maybe private, but there's a waiting list for private neurologists too. It's actually very difficult. So I know it might sound like I'm I suppose beating a drum here about how, you know, but I think given the program, Sláinte Care, all these initiatives, if we can just get you know, some support in building up the nurses, we will be able to make a contribution to neurology services. Is there someone?
Martina, thank you. I think you've given a really strong insight there. As I say, someone working at the front line. And as you say, there are positive stories here. The nurse provides a vital, critical service to patients, but you just feel neurology patients are just not getting a good deal because there simply isn't enough nurses in place. We've had a query, if you don't mind me seeing this on you. We've had a query from one of the audience just in relation to the training of nurse specialists in neurology. You know, what is the training? What's the length of time it takes them to be trained? What are the numbers coming out every year? Are there gaps there? Are there needs there in relation to training?
So I'm a general trained nurse, and I did a multiple sclerosis course through a university in the UK, and I have a master's in nursing. So I suppose there's no it would be better if we were able to do some of those things here in Ireland. So if we had a neurology course, and then people could specialize in their different area. I suppose it's one of the points I want to get across is that we can't just have nurses doing like 10 different conditions, because it's not feasible. But if a course that is generalized, and then people can specialize maybe in their dissertation or whatever like that. But it's something that we've been trying for a number of years in the MS group, is to get a course. A lot of our nurses have done courses through the UK. Yeah.
And I suppose just to come in on that, Martina, I suppose it's about making neurology nursing attractive for nurses as well. And I think if nurses see the situation at the moment where there's such a critical shortage, it's a disincentive to nurses to specialise and to go into this field, because they're aware, like you've been speaking about, the huge caseloads and the lack of opportunities, and at the moment we need to make it more attractive for people to go into this area of nursing.
If you wanted to do a different type of nursing, there is a pathway, there is an education pathway, and but unfortunately for some of neurology, that's not the case. I know the epilepsy program, they have done great work, and I know I've heard now about migraine and all that. But I suppose in terms of MS, there is, you know, still a bit to go. And that's not to mention the other conditions that are out there that currently don't have nursing support, which is, I suppose, something that really needs to be addressed. And just to re-emphasize again, I have patients from all over the country, because there are a lot of the country that do not have access to a neurologist, you know, never mind a nurse. So patients come to Dublin for their diagnosis and their management. And so I suppose part of it is to address, I suppose, the country as a whole. I know we're talking about Dublin today, and there, you know, there are shortfalls there, but it is the whole country.
I think that, Martina, that's a really, really vital point, that where we're looking at shortages in Dublin, it's because of shortages around the country as well that people are accessing Dublin services. And that point that Professor Hardiman made earlier, that a lot of the Dublin hospitals are providing those specialist centres of expertise, and they have that critical need for specialist nursing staffing to, I suppose, to roll out those new treatments that are coming on board, and to provide that proper service to people. I'm just going to pick up, Martina, on a point that you made around the access to a nurse specialist for some neurological conditions that don't have any nurse specialists at all. And I'm going to call on Emer just to speak at this stage, if you're available, Emer, just in relation to that particular situation of the conditions where there is no nurse specialist in place, because I know that's the situation in relation to your own condition.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mags. So hello everyone, my name is Emer, and I was delighted to be asked here today to speak at such an important event. I'm speaking today on behalf of Muscular Dystrophy Ireland, a voluntary member organisation which I joined a few years after my diagnosis. They have greatly assisted me in participating in society through their support services. So at 3 years of age, I was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy. This is a neuromuscular degenerative condition. I was too young at the time to notice any difference between myself and my peers. However, my parents did notice some significant differences. I would fall quite a lot due to losing my balance. I struggled to get up off the floor. I was able to walk slowly but independently until I was 16 years of age. And then I started to use a wheelchair because I was becoming increasingly fatigued and unbalanced. So now at 24 years of age, I use an electric wheelchair to get around. So particularly during my teenage years, I became increasingly aware of my deterioration and my condition. Daily activities became more challenging, and I needed to ask help to undertake these activities. So during these years, I suppose I became more aware of my condition, and gradually I had more questions about my diagnosis. So this meant more checkups and annual appointments. During the year, I would attend neurologists, orthopedic surgeons, respiratory consultants, rheumatologists, and cardiologists, as well as I would attend physiotherapists and occupational therapists locally. Each specialist provided a wealth of information that was specific to their area of specialty. So as Mags has mentioned, I have never been linked in with a neurology nurse. However, I do believe there will be substantial benefits to having a service like this. I think a neurology nurse would be invaluable in terms of linking services. So as I mentioned, in a given year, I would see numerous specialists all reporting on my condition. And it's a real challenge to try and get your head around this huge amount of information. And I think they will be a great help in terms of navigating all this information from the different disciplines. I believe a neurology nurse would be huge help in this regard. Being able to reach out to a single person, to contact them when you're feeling overwhelmed with the abundance of information would be hugely comforting. In addition to linking services directly within a hospital, I think they would be a great point of contact for linking with primary care services. So over the years, I would have met with physiotherapists and occupational therapists from my local area. as was the case majority of the time, when I would meet these people, I was the first individual they would have met with SMA, and they never really would have dealt with anyone in a similar situation to me within these services. So as a result of this, a substantial amount of time can be spent on identifying resources and equipment that will be suitable, and it kind of comes down to trial and error. And this is just a long process. And I think it would be fantastic if a neurology nurse was available in these areas to support and make recommendations, as they would have a greater understanding on how SMA or other neurological conditions specifically would affect a person. I also want to mention my transition, I suppose, from childhood services to adult services. So one of the challenges this posed for me was I went and I met a whole new team of specialists. This also happened during my time in adult services, where I've come under new specialists. So when I meet a new specialist for the first time, it involves giving them some insight onto my medical history, and also mentioning maybe times of significant changes in my condition. So as you can probably imagine, as time moves on, pinpointing times of significant deterioration becomes quite vague, and it's hard to remember. So I feel like a nurse also, in terms of linking reports over the years and from different areas, would be hugely beneficial to have this coordination and transfer of information from the different specialty areas. Another crucial benefit of neurology nurses would be in regard to the promptness of access to medical advice. So in relation to spinal muscular atrophy, for myself, issues can arise from time to time that are not permanent. Generally, when this happens, I would schedule an appointment with my specialist for an examination to discuss the issue. Often is the case that by the time I actually get to see my specialist, the symptoms are no longer visible, and therefore an opportunity for a diagnosis can be challenging. A neurology nurse would be a great person to be able to approach in times like this for some quick medical advice. So finally, I just want to reiterate my points. I believe a neurology nurse would be crucial in terms of navigating a new diagnosis and symptoms, linking services between different discipline specialists, and at a more local level offering support with primary care services. And finally, with respect to the promptness of access to specialist medical advice. So thank you all for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Emer. I think you've raised some fantastic points there of just the situation where it's not even for you and for people with your condition a case of there's not enough specialist nurses. There simply isn't any for adults with muscular dystrophy in this country. And I think that's a really, really important point to raise, that all of the things that you would like to have a nurse available for, to coordinate your care, to provide advice, support, information, you don't have access to those. And I think that's a really important point to make on behalf of you, just coming straight after Rare Disease Day yesterday, that we don't have specialist nurses, a critical recognised part of the care for people with rare diseases and rare neurological diseases. We don't have specialist nurses in this country, people living with those conditions. So thank you, Emer. I just want to go to our final speaker now, Veronica, who lives with multiple sclerosis, because Veronica is in the, I suppose, relatively lucky position of having access to an MS nurse. She's going to talk about the difference that makes in her life living with the neurological condition.
Hi, my name is Veronica, and I would like to talk to you the importance of the MS nurse. I attend Beaumont Hospital as a public patient, and if I was attending Beaumont Hospital as a private patient, I would not be entitled to the services of the MS nurse. This is very unfair. It's discrimination. The MS nurse me and the importance of her. I mentioned to a friend of mine who has primary progressive MS what his opinion of the MS nurse was. His response was as follows: I do believe that they are vital because many people only get to see their neurologist once a year, and even then they can expect to see a junior neurologist. The MS nurse can be a link for these people. Also, they can point newly diagnosed patients in the direction of many services. Now, here's my story. I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS over 20 years ago, on my second wedding anniversary at just over 30 years of age. I slipped through the cracks and I wasn't referred to the MS nurse. All the information I got was online through a very kind boss at work. It was over 1 year later when I obtained the services of the MS nurse. My mother also had MS, and it used to scare me when she was in a wheelchair, wondering how long it would be before I would be in one. And I had no MS nurse to talk to. I was also told 6 weeks after my diagnosis by a nurse who's married to a relation of mine not to have children, as I would be dead before the child would be 2. Again, no nurse to talk to. Upon hearing this information, I made an appointment with my GP to organise to have my tubes tied. I even told my husband to leave me, which he didn't. Thankfully, my GP was able to talk me down and suggested giving myself a few years to see how my MS was going and to talk to my neurologist. If I'd known about the services of the MS nurse, this could have been sorted out much quicker. There is a 65% chance of an MS attack within 6 months of giving birth. I am happy to say that our daughter is now 15 years of age, but she should be older. I was also one of the 35%, and I didn't have an MS attack after giving birth. When I did get the services of the MS nurse, it was a game changer. She was full of information, could answer my questions, alleviate my worries by talking them out, make recommendations on physiotherapy and occupational services. I could ring her 5 days a week. When I underwent chemotherapy in 2015, my MS acted up, and it was the MS nurse who sorted me out. On one occasion, I was put on oral steroids as I had an MS attack, and my GP wasn't sure what to prescribe for me. Again, the MS nurse stepped in, worked as an intermediary between the neurologist and my GP. The MS nurse has prevented me contacting the neurological department or blocking up the A&E department in order to receive treatment. If I cannot gain access to an MS nurse when I have an issue with my MS, I would have no choice but to go to A&E department and take up the time of the staff in the A&E department and a neurologist. I've had several falls and broken both elbows. I even had to get retrained how to walk to try and cut down on my falls when I stopped using the pram for our daughter. I've only had one fall in 2022 and thankfully broke nothing. If I had primary progressive MS, my need for the MS nurse would be a lot greater, as you can go from walking to being in a wheelchair in a few short years. And obviously there would be a lot of other complications as well. Every part of your body can be affected by MS, whether it is speech, swallow, movement, etc. Sadly now, you only can phone the MS nurse on a Monday, Tuesday and Thursday between the hours of 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. There are 2 full-time nurses in Beaumont, but with clinics in excess of 1,500 MS patients in Beaumont, they are overstretched. The ratio of an MS nurse to an MS patient should be 350 patients to 1 MS nurse. We need to be able to contact the MS nurse at least 5 days a week, if not 7 days a week. MS attacks happen 7 days a week and not Monday to Friday between the hours of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. We all know the last 2 years have been difficult with COVID, but I do not know when I last spoke to my MS nurse. I consider myself lucky as my MS is behaving itself and I am in remission. But if the situation changes, I will need the services of the MS nurse. As I mentioned, I had cancer in 2015. As soon as I was diagnosed with cancer, a cancer nurse was assigned to me, and she was my port of call for everything. I could ring her 5 days a week. I would ring, leave a message, and she would get back to me within an hour or less. I would tell her my problem, and she would decide if I needed to call into the hospital for treatment or not. She could send out prescriptions, organise scans, change appointment dates, etc., preventing me from contacting the oncology department, Professor Hill, or Dr. Morris. The MS nurse has decided to specialise in a specific area, and is studied to become a qualified MS nurse. My GP, while brilliant, is not qualified to deal with an illness like MS. He can look after my general well-being of me, like with all his other patients. In my opinion, it is a win-win situation to employ more MS nurses, to take the pressure off the existing MS nurses, the neurologists, and the A&E departments. The situation is not just in Beaumont, but in every hospital in Dublin that is looking after MS patients. I would like to thank you for taking time to listen to me, and I hope you take on board my points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. And I think we've heard between yourself and Emer, we've heard such powerful testimonies from people living with neurological conditions of the difference this access to a specialist nurse makes. And it's not just, you know, it's an economic argument as much as anything else. It makes sense. It's taking pressure off neurology services, taking pressure off GPs, just a much better way to provide healthcare at the end of the day. I want to thank everyone for their contributions this morning, including Professor Hardiman, who's had to leave. And just to say on behalf of the campaign that for the month of March, it's not just about the launch today. For the entire month of March, we will be meeting one-to-one with Dublin TDs to highlight the situation in their hospitals. Then we're coming back in May this year with a face-to-face event with TDs, which will be the culmination, the national culmination of the Patients Deserve Better campaign, in time for the estimates process, in time for the health estimates process later on this year, before the summer. And we will be sending a strong message on behalf of the patient organisations throughout Ireland, on behalf of people living with neurological conditions, of the critical need to invest in specialist nurses in neurology going forward. We're delighted to have the support of the Neurology Clinical Programme, led by Professor Orla Hardiman. You heard her saying this morning her commitment to specialist nurses throughout her career, her commitment as clinical lead to invest in specialist nurses as a way of, as a critical need within neurology services to address waiting lists. I just want to give the opportunity maybe to Martina just to come in with a final comment there around her hopes, as I say, as a nurse working at the front line, of, I suppose, what she is looking for as a specialist nurse, what she would hope for, speaking for her colleagues this morning.
Thanks very much. So I suppose what we're looking for is that, I suppose, every patient will have access to a nurse, and that they will have access to a nurse when they need it. So what was said there about, you know, access being limited, that the access is not limited, that nurses are provided with the training they need to do the job, that we have nurses who want to come into the area, that there is a plan. A number of us are retiring in the next few years, and there is no, I suppose, plan for people after that. We need to think about how nurses are going to be replaced that are, I suppose, nurses, how there's going to be a succession plan for nursing. We need to work together, I suppose, with all the different organisations. We need to work with the neurology programme, and I suppose with government and our local representatives to say we need to do better. Like, I suppose what the campaign is that patients deserve better. And I suppose we're talking, and the focus today is neurology patients, but I suppose all patients deserve better. And I know we've come out of COVID, and there's been a lot of, it's been a tough couple of years, but hopefully there is some light now, and I suppose that we can get the services together that people do need. And for the services that don't have a nurse, that is something that is looked into. I suppose we have to see where these nurses are going to come from. It has to, I suppose, stem from when nurses are doing their courses, when they're starting out, that it's seen as a vital area to get involved in. Patients also need to be linked into rehabilitation. So it's not just about, so when a patient is diagnosed, it's the whole, I suppose, trajectory of their condition. We need to think about their treatment, how that's managed. We need to think about you know, other services that they need, and rehab is part of that. So I suppose there's a lot to work on, but I suppose step by step, hopefully we'll get there. And I am positive about the future. And I hope that, you know, I have a few years to retirement, but not that many. So I'm hoping by the time I retire that things will have improved a lot, and that there will be somebody in my chair that can take over.
And just thank you, Martina. And I suppose just as a final message on behalf of the campaign and the organisation's behalf of the campaign, we can't stand over a situation where over 23,000 people in Ireland are waiting for a neurological appointment. These are serious conditions affecting the brain. And we can't sit by and just watch those waiting lists climb year on year. And we've seen throughout, and Professor Hardiman said it in her opening address today, nurse specialists are key to that. In the short to medium term, the longer term, nurse specialists are key to tackling waiting lists. They're critical to the efficacy of neurology services. I would encourage everyone in the audience to visit www.patientsdeservebetter.ie, the campaign website. Let your TDs know throughout Dublin. The website Patients Deserve Better allows you to pick your local Dublin hospital and contact the relevant TDs to let them know about the shortage of neurology nurses and what needs to be done. I want to thank all of my speakers this morning, and just to say we are focusing on this campaign throughout the month of March, and we will be back with a national culmination event in May to all the TDs in the country. Martina, you want to come in then again there?
I know that we're talking about the hospitals and the acute hospital services, but I suppose we need to also think about nursing in the community, and also, you know, because patients live with these conditions in the community, and hospital is kind of the it's part of the of the care, but I suppose that patients can be helped to manage their condition also in the community, so that it's the approach, I suppose, is not just about the hospital. From, I suppose, nursing point of view, or my point of view, is that we need to think about lots of things when it comes to neurology and neurology nursing.
Yeah, and I think at the bottom of it all, we just keep coming back to resources, Martina, because if there were enough nurses in place, they could be looking at models like that about community outreach. At the moment, certainly the nurses we've spoken to around the country with this campaign, they're firefighting. They're literally just trying to, as I say, they're carrying excessive caseloads. They're not getting to the patients they need to be getting to. So I think we have a critical resource issue to start with, but certainly we take that on board, that there are different ways of working if we can just get the numbers right. So I'd like to thank everyone this morning, encourage people to visit Patients Deserve Better, contact your local Dublin TDs, and we will certainly we hope to see everyone again in May at our face-to-face event with TDs from around the country. Thank you very much.